up in the much harsher confines of the state penitentiary in Florence. However, he would avoid such a fate and stay in Prima County by complaining of an ulcer, an ailment that required him to stay there in the Prima County jail so he could continue to receive care from his doctor. Indeed, not only would Titanic not get sent to the state penitentiary, he would only serve 8 months of his 2-year sentence before being released for good behavior. The 62-year-old, though, remained determined to continue his life as a roving gambler. So he and his exceedingly young bride would head west to Long Beach, California, where Titanic made money playing cards and hustling young golfers who had money but didn't know any better. Like always, though, Titanic could only ply his trade in one place for so long before word started getting around and people no longer wanted to make bets with him. Yet luckily, just as the action in Long Beach was drying up, word reached Titanic that oil had been struck in New Mexico. So once again the couple were off, as Titanic followed the news of the oil strike, knowing that there would be money and opportunities there for someone like himself. Meanwhile, Jeanette was learning to live with her husband. For example, she learned not to disturb his rest, which meant staying quiet throughout the morning as he slept till around noon after long nights out gambling. This one time even included driving herself to the hospital rather than waking her husband up when she had a ruptured appendix, and this also included accepting it when he did not visit her in the hospital during her week-long stay there because she knew he did not like illness. At the same time, she also seemed to take an interest and some joy in her husband's love of numbers and odds, knowledge that he seemingly enjoyed sharing with her as well. He also appears to have taught Jeanette how to shoot, as she, like his previous wives, took up the hobby of target shooting and became quite skilled at it. This kind of rhythm that their lives had settled into, though, would be disrupted when in 1959, the 23-year-old Jeanette became pregnant with her 66-year-old husband's child. At which point, much like he had the previous 2 times this had happened, Titanic Thompson just up and left, leaving behind a shoebox of cash. Yet, unlike with his previous 2 wives, Titanic Thompson actually returned a year after abandoning Jeanette to find her looking after his latest son, Ty. For whatever reason, it seems that the old gambler actually had a change of heart and decided that he was actually going to stay this time around. During his time away, Titanic seems to have, like he always did, spent his time hustling unsuspecting marks on the golf course. This included former world heavyweight champion boxer Joe Louis, who, since retiring from the ring, had become a fairly skilled golfer. In fact, Joe himself reportedly had a habit of hustling other celebrity golfers when they played. That being said, Louis would be no match for Titanic and his partner in crime Bob Hamilton, who had won the PGA Championship in 1944. The pair initially played against Louis for $5,000 and just beat him. Being good sports, though, they gave Louis a chance to make his money back, and since the match had been so close, Louis took them up on their offer, betting $10,000 on the outcome this time around. Unfortunately, he again came just shy of winning, but once again Titanic and Hamilton were willing to give the former boxing champ another shot, and so they played again with Louis betting $20,000, but yet again he fell short. It has to be said, though, by this point Titanic more and more had to rely on his young golfing partners to be his ace in the hole. To that end, during this time, Titanic teamed up with high school golfer Don Stickney after learning of the boys' victory in the Ohio amateur competition against 18-year-old Jack Nicklaus. Now, Don's mother believed the old gambler to be little more than a crook, but trusting in the old man's promise of a chance to earn some serious money, the high school golfer opted to join him on the road for the summer regardless of his mother's wishes. Titanic then drove to a town remote enough from Stickney's home that neither of them would be readily recognized. There they hustled some wealthy golfers, including Bayard Heath, the heir to the Heath Candy Company's fortune. While they won a decent chunk of change from these exploits, as much as anything, this seemed to be a test of Stickney's skills, as now that Titanic was satisfied, he set his real plan into motion, as he gave the young Stickney a pair of overalls and sent him to work a farm he was leasing that sat right next to a golf course. This was a strange request, especially since Titanic himself wasn't even sticking around for much of that time. For 3 straight weeks, though, Stickney did as he was instructed, driving a tractor and doing various jobs around the farm in his overalls in clear view of the golfers on the neighboring course. Then, when Titanic finally returned to town, he seemingly had a new partner, as Bob Hamilton, unlike Stickney, actually got to join Titanic on the golf course. Thompson and Hamilton, though, seemed to be off their game, as Titanic lost multiple matches, costing him several $1,000s in the process. After several days of this, Titanic finally exploded, shouting at Hamilton after they had lost a $5,000 bet. Blaming Hamilton for his losses, the aging Titanic sent the former PGA champ packing. The apparently overwrought Titanic then turned to his wealthy opponents, who he had already lost some $10,000 to, and since he was blaming all of his misfortune on his former partner, he asked for another chance to win his money back. In fact, he was so confident that Hamilton was the problem, he wanted to play them for $50,000 this time. Heck, to sweeten the deal and make things fair, since he would no longer have that albatross Hamilton hanging around his neck, he not only offered to play left-handed this time around, but to allow his opponents to pick his partner. Anyone else, he insisted, would be better than allows Hamilton. His wealthy opponents then let greed get in the way of common sense, all the while apparently ignoring the alarm bells that should have been going off in their heads and the squid-faced man standing nearby shouting, "It's a trap!" as they instead accepted Titanic's offer and even reportedly thought themselves clever as they selected the kid they had seen working the farm next door for the past 3 weeks to be his partner. Predictably then, Titanic instinctively won and split the $50,000 three ways with their accomplice Bob Hamilton. It was then after 2 years of living this life that Titanic Thompson, for whatever reason, decided to return to his young wife and the son he had never seen, at which point he settled down with Jeanette and their young son Ty in San Antonio, where the old gambler still managed to find and take advantage of a few high-stakes poker games here and there, while still managing to hustle at golf even though his drives were a shadow of what they once were. Titanic then was, unsurprisingly, working on his golf game in his front yard one evening when a blue Jaguar convertible pulled up in front of his house. A young man then stepped out of the fancy car and asked the still tall and thin old man if his name was Titanic. Obviously wary, Titanic asked who wanted to know, at which point the young man announced that his name was Tommy, and he was Titanic Thompson's first son he had abandoned. Tommy's mother was Joanne, Titanic's third wife, who he had surrendered his oil wells to when he decided to divorce her after impregnating her. Joanne, as it turns out, had subsequently married a plastics executive and become a women's golf champion in Indiana. As for Tommy, he had followed in his biological father's footsteps and become a professional gambler, even though Titanic had never in any way been a part of his life, as he had never phoned, visited, or even sent a birthday card. Still, young Tommy had managed to follow some of his father's exploits in the newspapers, so after cheating the members of the local Elks Club out of their money at the poker table, Tommy had set off on the road to become a traveling gambler like his old man. Learning this, Titanic brought his son inside and proceeded to beat Tommy at game after game of dice and cards, winning his money to show him how far he still needed to go, but returning the younger man's money each time. Tommy then moved in with Titanic, Jeanette, and young Ty, and the old gambler began teaching his first son some of the tricks of his trade. Tommy was soon then on his way to becoming an expert gambler, and out of respect for his assistants, he cut his father in on his subsequent winnings. That being said, Titanic himself wasn't completely out of the game yet. Even though he was entering his 70s come the 1960s, the old man still apparently had a few tricks up his sleeve, like the one he reportedly pulled on a high-ranking member of the Savella crime family, a deception that was probably not without its risks, considering that the Savellas ruled Kansas City's underworld. The risk, though, was probably part of the excitement for Titanic, who was familiar with this particular criminal figure as they regularly held casino nights at their home, a home that included a sizable rock garden that Titanic knew they took great pride in. Knowing this, Titanic waited until the high-ranking mob member and his wife went on vacation, during which time the old gambler reportedly hired a team of quarry workers to hollow out the largest boulder in the rock garden and subsequently cover over the holes they created with cement to hide the deception. With this work done, Titanic then waited until the next time the mobster held a casino night in his house, during which Titanic loudly bet he could roll one of the rocks from the garden down the hill to the driveway. The old man, as you would expect, then selected one of the smaller ones that only weighed like 500 pounds. The aging Titanic, though, could not get the rock to budge. Still remaining determined, however, he then doubled the wager and selected a different larger boulder, but he again failed. Then again, playing the gambler who did not know when to quit, Titanic turned his attention to the biggest boulder in the yard, a boulder that stood some 8 feet tall. Now, despite failing to push 2 smaller rocks, Titanic loudly announced that he bet $20,000 that he could push this massive boulder down the hill. The mob don reportedly took this bet, and Titanic, after making a great show of limbering up, put his shoulder against the huge rock and easily sent it careening down the hill. As it picked up speed, it became pretty obvious that there was something off about this boulder, as it bounced off of saplings rather than crushing them underneath. The party reportedly grew silent at this point, while everyone waited to see how the Mom Don would react to Titanic's grand trick. After standing there stunned for a few moments, the mafioso started applauding. Now, whether he was truly amused and willing to pay $20,000 to have his own personal Titanic Thompson story, or if he was just playing the part as was expected of every gambler who lost, whether fair and square or through deception, I can't say. Regardless, according to this story, the Mob Don paid up, as he accepted his loss with grace. Titanic also wasn't through with golf, although his best days were far in the rearview mirror. Indeed, his most notable accomplishment involving the game at this point involved him being one of the money men behind one of the most famous golfing duels of all time. On one side of this duel was Lee Trevino, who, according to his Wikipedia page, was the winner of 6 major championships at 29 PGA Tour events. As such, he's now considered to be one of the greatest golfers of all time. Before all of that, however, Lee grew up poor in a dirt floor shack that didn't have any plumbing or windows. Lee also never knew his father and had been working since age 5. His jobs included working in the fields on his grandfather's tenant farm while also helping him dig graves. Eventually, though, young Lee found work caddying at Glen Lakes Country Club in Dallas, before serving in the Army and eventually getting a job at Hardy's driving range, which is where he would first meet Titanic Thompson. Now, Trevino, unlike some other golfers, had no qualms about working with the old gambler. After all, Lee himself had become a bit of a hustler just to survive. Among Lee's tricks was using a Dr. Pepper bottle as his club. Titanic, after seeing this trick and the young man's obvious skills, got involved and used his own money backing Trevino in wagers the young man couldn't match with his own meager funds. With Titanic's help then, Lee started making more money through such wagers than he could on his own, even if he was splitting the winnings with the other man. However, during this particular duel, Titanic would not be betting on young Trevino, and would instead be backing his opponent Raymond Floyd, who at the time was just a second-year tour pro. Raymond, though, would go on to have a Hall of Fame resume after winning 2 PGA championships, the 1976 Masters and the 1986 US Open. Notably, Floyd was also a bit of a hustler himself, as he agreed to play games where he bet he could win hitting 2 balls and playing the worst of the 2. Titanic then was impressed after watching the young man play, and equally impressed by his confidence and bravado, as he reportedly declared to both Titanic and his wife that he was the greatest golfer in the world, which was quite the proclamation, and one that Titanic was not only inclined to believe, but also bet on, especially after hearing that the young Mexican-American Trevino had moved to El Paso, where he had garnered some big money backers from Ciudad Juarez who were willing to stake him against all comers. Sensing his opportunity then, Titanic Thompson got into contact with the self-proclaimed greatest golfer in the world, and offered Raymond Floyd an opportunity to play for some real money. Now, understand Titanic was betting big on Floyd, mostly because he had never put any money away, and so now in his twilight years he didn't exactly have much left. Still, he managed to scrape together $25,000 to bet on this match, and pay for Floyd to travel out to Horizon Hills for the game. For his part, Floyd, as was typical for golfers involved in such matches, he had no idea about how much money was involved. As such, the supremely confident golfer didn't feel a ton of pressure concerning his upcoming match. In fact, if anything, the supremely confident golfer only became even more confident when he learned that the young Mexican-American man who had carried his clubs into the locker room when he arrived was going to be his opponent. Floyd was so confident that he could beat the locker room boy that he even declined the opportunity to walk and study the course beforehand. The following day, when Floyd faced off against young Trevino, who stood just 5'7" compared to the 6' Floyd, Titanic Thompson bet $9,000 that his man would win. The game that day was a close one, but in the end, Trevino's knowledge of the course and his eccentricities proved to be the difference as he won by a single stroke, meaning that Titanic was now out $9,000. That being said, he and Floyd weren't beaten yet. The match had been so close they insisted on playing again the next day for the same stakes, and Trevino's Mexican backers agreed. That being said, Trevino's backers did try to tip the odds even more in their favor when they invited Floyd out for a night on the town in Juarez. Floyd, though, despite spending the night out drinking, did not seem to be affected at all when he took to the course again the next day. Yet again, though, Trevino would carry the day, as he won once again by a single stroke. Now, Titanic had been calm after the first day's loss, but he was said to have been apoplectic after the result of the second day. After all, he brought the self-proclaimed best golfer in the world to play against a kid who wasn't even on the PGA Tour yet, and he was losing. Still not willing to admit defeat, then Titanic managed to talk the men backing Trevino into a third and final match